over there. We're live on YouTube. Welcome to another Candlelit Tales storytelling post-show chat. We're here with Oisín Ryan and my sister across over on her own shafis, and we're going to be talking about the last episode, which was the death of Roi Mac Daire. Now, we have a whole death series coming up, and we're going to go into the deaths of a lot of Ulster heroes, heroines, and the rest. But before we do that, we want to let you know about a few things that we've got going on this coming week. Now, it's heading towards solstice. We're nearly at the end. We're nearly at the darkest time of year. It basically doesn't get bright anymore. It's very hard to do things, but we're doing things. And we are doing things on Tuesday. We're going to Dublin, Dunleary Lexicon, and we're going to be recording a special show for special release across tobeirish.ie, across a few different library channels, and it's all to celebrate the diaspora and give them something that they can hold on to make them feel proud of being Irish when they can't come home to Ireland over Christmas, which is a bit strange. So if people can't come home, to be Irish, are proud to be Irish.ie, it can be releasing our video, which is very nice, which is something that was being sponsored by the Department of Foreign Affairs. So that's class. Thanks for getting us involved, lads, with that. All down to people supporting us and word of mouth spreading about us and stuff like that. On Wednesday we're doing something as well. Oisín, we're doing a live stream show with somebody else, and we'll reg people to raise funds for homeless. Go on to our Instagram or our Facebook. And
I was like, wow, I totally forgot about it. I was like, I went to see the Tuesday one superseded the Wednesday one.
Yeah. It's all been a bit last minute. But it's great because we're going to be raising money. Every year we raise money for some charity, and this year we're helping a group of people out that is raising money for homeless, which is a very important thing to be doing and focusing on at the moment. And last but not least, the last thing I want to mention is something that's very close to my heart, very close to some people's hearts, not your guys's, because you're not sports fans, but Limerick won the All-Ireland final today, and it was amazing. It was brilliant. They were fucking great. They're an amazing team. And my brother was watching in Guatemala. So the Irish diaspora across the world were tuning in and watching an epic game of hurling and watching Limerick win what should have been a 3 in a row, but they only won 1, 2 and 3 years because they didn't win last year. Fucking ref. The ref screwed them, lads. The ref screwed them. But it was important to tune in to the fact that a lot of Irish people across the world were tuning in to an Irish sport played today in December. Mental, madness, weird altogether. But that's my intro. How are we doing for time?
Can everybody hear it?
I don't know what time is anymore.
I'm going to check some comments. Make sure.
I don't believe in time since March.
If you're listening on Instagram and you're wondering why this is all weird and tilted, go over to YouTube and you can hear us better. And thank you everyone on YouTube for tuning in. And if you can still see me, Oisín, stop blocking me. What are you doing?
And if anyone's on Facebook, we're not live because I can't get the page to load.
That's alright, never mind. Technology is against us in that one.
Yeah.
On the plus side, we have technology with us for various things. We are doing a death series coming soon. We're going to have a promo that was beautifully shot. Well, it's a promo for Candlelit Tales.
The death series began with this last podcast that was released, which was the death of Roi Mac Daire. So it's not really coming soon anymore. It's underway.
The video I was talking about is coming soon. The video we just shot,
inspired
by the death series. That's coming.
Right.
A very special edited video coming soon. Simon O'Neill, a beautiful cinematographer, came along and collaborated with us, and we're very, very lucky to be releasing a very cool and co-written piece that we put together. It's basically all kind of help writers. So stay tuned, we'll be releasing that very soon. And this was a kind of inspired by looking at winter. Everything dies in winter, death rates go up in winter, everything about Ireland kind of just seems to die for a while. And yet the whole, as you said, Zerka, there's a whole kind of series of stories that are death stories, because we have epics that are, I don't know, it's how we get remembered, right?
Yes. The death stories, it's one of those kind of interesting little things about Irish mythology, as how it might have worked as a religion was the telling of certain tales at certain times of the year. And the death stories were, well, I mean, we know the Tone is a midwinter story. the Ulster Cycle, which is why we tend to tell it in November when days are dark. But yeah, death stories are also kind of an important genre. And it again, it was people did things a little bit differently back in the day, so you wouldn't necessarily tell all of the stories of the Ulster Cycle at one go, and then all of the stories of the mythological cycle in one go. You would tell voyage stories, or death stories, or birth stories, and kind of group them in a different way.
Okay.
So this one we particularly are focusing on the Ulster Cycle, not just deaths of Ulster people, because Connacht people were significant in that as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like Queen Maeve props up her in the Ulster Cycle predominantly, so I kind of associate her with that series of stories.
And in the Mayo Tawn and in several other things. But yes, she is the she's the main antagonist in the Ulster Cycle, I suppose, depending on which perspective you take.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, I guess I was very excited by this one because, well, we've been talking about how we found it quite different, changing from live shows and focusing on podcasts, and the live element of telling stories is really kind of changed when you go back into telling stories into a mic without the audience response. And Oisín, you are our producer, our magic maker, our music maker, our man behind all of the things that we do most of the time. You've told stories live with us plenty of times, and this is your first time telling a story on the podcast. Can you tell us what the difference is like?
Absolute nightmare. Like as we always say, a story is a teller and a listener. You know, and when you don't have somebody to listen to, it's very, very difficult to tell the story because we don't script. So you know, you're trying to you're telling a story and it's supposed to be a flow and it's supposed to have a beat and it's supposed to have everything else, but it's like either into a screen or it's into an empty room, or if you're me, you cheat and you invite friends over and you tell them the story.
That's a good way of doing it.
Yeah, and what's weird is like when I do the music for certain stories, especially if we haven't done a story live, I kind of lately I just kind of visualize doing the story upstairs in the Harbour Bar.
Nice.
You know, and I just kind of close my eyes and pretend I'm kind of sitting there, and you kind of get used to the familiar faces around the place, and I kind of put myself in that headspace. But I wasn't able to do that for the Roi story at all, and I got lost in a sea of facts and tangents, and I was like, "Ooh, hang on a second. It's actually supposed to be about the death of Roi." And another coincidence, or maybe not coincidence, this is one of the first stories that you sent me, circa a recording of ahead of her story, but we did it as Blonde.
Yeah, I've always told it as Blonde's story.
Yeah, and you sent me a recording and we were going to do it for the festival, so it was one of the first ones I ever just heard the story and did that. But also it changed, it changed at her story from the telling, because it was told and it's written as "don't trust women." Because they'll stab you in the back and they'll betray you, and that's a common theme actually going through a lot of stories. There's a whole bit in the next story that we're going to be doing that's basically the main guy's assistant is like, don't ever tell your wife the truth.
Well,
you know, because
you touched on a very important point there. Like the cultural context of this story when it was told initially was to warn men not to trust women because they'll betray you, even though the story is quite definitely about a man who...
I wouldn't say that that's the cultural context of the story as it was told originally, because we don't know the cultural context of the story as it was told originally.
Sorry, as it, when in terms of the written sources that we found for it,
when it was written down and when it was told originally are sometimes separated in Irish mythology by thousands of years, or definitely centuries. I don't have a good sense of how old these stories are at all, but certainly the way that it was written down was as a story like great men need to be careful not to trust women because women will screw you over.
Yeah.
Not maybe don't abduct and rape people because they might not be very happy with you.
So just
that wasn't even a consideration. It's like, oh, hang on, what, they don't want to be abducted and raped? What?
How?
No, of course,
Yeah.
I'm getting 3
What
cows,
do
a coat
women
and a plenty,
want?
and you're one.
so hang on, Sorcha.
How can we ever...
You've always told us from Blanid's perspective, and I guess again in terms of the building blocks of the story, the way we beat out stories and live or perform them live, and find a flow and find a kind of a way of telling, the interaction between the audience and the telling, and all of those beats that you find within it that you don't quite know how to phrase something. It's not completely scripted, and that's one of the reasons it's so hard to tell it into a microphone when it's not fully scripted, unless you do, and then you lose that little element of, then you feel that you might be reading it, and it loses that kind of ethereal magic that kind of lifts you out into a story, I find anyway. Even though I sometimes am guilty, these days, of scripting a lot of my stories and kind of looking away from the page, looking back, and because I find it difficult to just simply... do we lose Sorcha for a moment? She was frozen there for a
I
little
think
while.
we did lose Sorcha.
Okay.
Well, I know from my point of view, what happened was, first of all, I told the story. I used the Zoom, so
Yeah.
I sat in a room, and I told the first part of the story as I had it in my head, because you know yourself, you can have it in your head, but until you actually say it out loud, it doesn't work. It's words flow differently in the world.
And I heard you doing things that I do, which is kind of that making up, adding too many things, running into descriptions.
Repeating a description, which works great in a live show because you can go like, and this, and this, and this, and this, and you get a bit of energy with it and flow. But on a podcast, you definitely don't want to be doing that because it just gets samey.
And there's a weird difference between flow and perfection. You're always trying to balance it up, aren't you? You're like, okay, I want to get into the flow of the story, and in live shows, a little trip there or here, it doesn't really matter because it's you're building it, you're exchanging that energy with the audience, and then you don't have that, and all of a sudden it has to be perfect because you can't have the flaws when you're listening to something in the headphones. You've very little tolerance for mistakes. It needs to be all perfect because we're so used to perfection and something to be delivered that way. So all of a sudden you're just left out of the loop.
The other thing as well, when we're doing it live, it's not one person. No. You're telling a story, or you're playing a piece of music, or you're doing whatever, but everybody's there supporting that telling.
Yeah.
So if there's a trip up, somebody's there to catch it, and it keeps the flow going. But when you're just in an empty room talking to a microphone and you trip up, it's just echoing around the room.
Well, you said, I have to kind of tune into pretending that I'm in a live performance. I'm trying to have to go back into that muscle memory and try and remember that I am speaking to several hundred people who will be listening to this. Because as we've said recently, more people have listened to our podcast than I've ever seen us live, which is kind of mind blowing. Because we've started as a live performing troupe. And now we're kind of going, okay, these stories will be listened to over and over again. So that performance and the encouragement and people linking in with us is great, and it's fantastic to see that. But it's just it's a different type of flow. It's a different type of execution, and it's kind of interesting to hear you talk about the energy, the motivation, the difficulty you had with it, because it kind of shone a light on it's tricky, it's different, it's relearning the same skill but in a different way. You know.
And I was the other thing, and I was trying to do I wanted it to be a storytelling as well. I didn't want to do any actual voices as such. So I wanted to speak each of the characters' words, so then I had to very carefully remember tenses. You don't want to get into that first present horrible History Channel stuff where he sits there and waits. It's like no. So there's a couple of them. It's just straight away blip. So I recorded the story in 3 parts. Yeah. Then I transcribed the story in 3 parts. Then I rewrote this. Then I fixed the transcription in 3 parts. Then I re-recorded the story.
You went over it.
Yeah, sent it to you guys for a bit of feedback.
And it was interesting. You just all of it. It was just that slightly bit too mono. You were just like, oh, okay. But what you found in what you did was a lovely lift, a a few different variations, and then you played the music that was going on probably in your head as you were saying it. Sorg is now calling me because she can't get online.
Answer. It's grand. Yeah.
How are you, Sorga? You've dropped out on our YouTube channel. We're on live here.
Yeah, I need you to add me back into the Zoom meeting.
Oh.
Tech fail. Sorry, guys. We've been chatting away about flow and all those things.
I'll talk to you in a sec.
She's gone.
Where's the...
Please bear with us for one moment while we have a little bit of a tech fail. Guys, if you're watching us on Instagram, it's much better on YouTube. There's a whole much better thing going on. So pop on over there. I wanted to leave this running to let you know that we're on YouTube. And hit subscribe. And, hit the little bell icon. And how you lads? Yeah, a few more people joining us here. We're actually live on YouTube. Much better sound quality than everything. And once Circa joins us, we'll be probably editing this out of the podcast that we put out later on. I always say that.
Return to a meeting.
There it is. Looks great.
Yeah.
We're talking about our last episode 72, 73, the death of Roi Mac Daire, which is the start of our death series.
Hey!
We have Sorka back online. Go over to our YouTube channel, hit subscribe, and follow the chat. So we're back with Sorka. And
died.
You're back.
Everything shut down simultaneously.
Oh no.
Let me just... Yeah, no, I just need to make sure that I was recording this on my end, which also died. So give me 2 seconds, just start that back up again. And then we should be good.
Happy days. Small bit of a tech clip, but we're all getting used to the ins and outs of these things, aren't we? God, the amount of Zoom meetings and rehearsals and team things and stuff like that, it's mad. I will actually do a small plug for the Abbey, who are doing the Abbey calling at the moment. And next week, starting on Tuesday, I'm very proud to be one of the 50 actors selected in a group of actors reading Patrick Kavanagh, James Joyce, different poets, Evan Boland, Kevin Barry, loads of different writers, prose and poems, going to people in isolation and people who have been directly linked in with Alone, the charity, and the Abbey and Alone are teaming up to get people engaged with creativity in the arts again.
Deadly.
So that's fucking awesome. And if you know anyone who has been feeling extra alone in the last several months and not been able to see live shows or go to any performances and really kind of needs it, well, give them a lift. Go on to the Abbey website and you'll see the link, and you can share them and you can book in. It's free, and it's also something you can raise money and offer money to Alone, because that's another charity that's very worthwhile. So that's my little plug for that. Sorka, would you do me a small favour and recap us on the story of Roi Mac Daire, of the death of Roi, because I just want to get us listening back on track with this story.
Sure. So Roi, just the death. Oisín gave us some more context about who he was and what his whole deal was in the telling. He abducted it started when he abducted a young woman during a raid by the Ulstermen that he joined in disguise. And then basically when they didn't give him a share of the loot, he kind of went off on them. That this was dishonourable, and said, I'm taking everything. So he took the magic cauldron and he took the magic cows and he took the beautiful girl. Turned out the girl was in love with Cuchulainn, and it's possible that the raid had been kind of prearranged for the two of them to get together. She essentially conspired with Cuchulainn to assassinate Roi. And this was a more difficult task than met the eye, because Roi Mac Daire kept his heart in a salmon, or his soul in a salmon, so that he couldn't be killed. And it ended up being a plan that took a long time to execute. Blóithín, the girl in question, who Roi had abducted and taken home and made to be his wife, convinced him to make a tower out of a piece of stone from every part of Ireland, and lured him into the tower at a signal that she had arranged with Cuchulainn, which was dumping milk into the river to turn it white, and tied him down and let the Ulstermen in. And he still was a ferocious warrior, and he still fought ferociously and killed many of them, but eventually Cuchulainn killed him. And the poet of Curoi, who was, loyal to the end to his master and absolutely devastated at his death, his life was spared by Roi Mac Daire, because Roi was a great supporter of poets. And he, rather than tell the stories of Curoi, grabbed Blothin and jumped off a cliff, pulling her to her death along with him. And also killing the stories of Roi Mac Daire, other than the story of his death. Yeah. So it's a kind of a... And as we were talking, just when I got cut off, this was a story that was kind of written down and recorded as, great men fall through the treachery of bitches. Yeah. And that's how, that was the kind of lesson for the ages, was don't trust women. Yeah. Because women are untrustworthy. Not, if you abduct a woman and rape her and hold her prisoner against her will, she might have some feelings about you.
yeah. Ignore all those. It's don't trust them with your secrets, lads. Yeah.
Yes. I wonder when that actually came into the story.
Yeah, well, because there's a couple of layers that look a bit suspicious in it, isn't there?
Right. Well, now I've done a lot of research on Curoi because he's quite interesting, and he pops up in other mythos. He's Koshkai in Slavic culture, and he does the whole sea monster thing, and Blothin was, and you see the raid was on Fair Falga, as it was known then, but before that it was known as Tir Tangara, and after that it was known as the Isle of Man. And the king was Manon on Mac Daire, and she was one of his daughters in another source text. And you know what happens when you start fucking with two of the Danann women? And it's not women. And apparently she broke, there's stories for her as well, where she's apparently associated with breaking the hearts of a load of people, but I couldn't find any of them. And also I was like, shit, just fucking focus on the dead. Yeah. Stop going into all of this mad stuff. But there's loads of really cool Curoi stuff. And then apparently there's the whole Lost Hound of Munster cycle that's kind of hinted at throughout research. You're like, there's a bit of it somewhere. But
this is what I find fascinating about Roi Mac Daire, is he sounds like such an epic character. He crops up again and again in the Intoxication of Ulstermen. He imprisons them all in the kind of Iron House, and in the Champions portion, he's the one who says that Cuchulainn is the champion, and he lays down the law with that. And there's loads of parts where he comes up again and again, but he seems like a figure and a character that, much like Skahak, it seems to be, there must be more stories there. And then you go looking for
Curoi is also interesting in the fact that he's bigger than Ireland. He keeps leaving Ireland. And so like you were saying, Oisín, he comes up in Slavic mythology as Koshkai the Deathless. There's a possibility that's even the same kind of figure, who also kept his heart outside of his body. And also abducted the beloved of a young hero who goes on a quest to try and kill him. So it's a very, very similar story, but he's this wanderer. So a lot of his story doesn't take place in Ireland. And even in the Champions portion, in the episode that takes place in Curoi's house, he's not there. Because he's gone.
That's the plot point. You see, he's so arrogant that he left Blothin there to entertain Cunall Cearnach, Larry Buyok, and Cuchulainn. Yeah. At which point, Cuchulainn and Blothin decided, right, well, this is how we're going to fucking kill you
Well, also, in that story, she's referred to as his daughter.
Yeah.
Not his wife.
Yeah.
Which is another kind of, interesting one. It's not really, there's a lot of that in Irish mythology where the same names are given to different people. You've got a huge number of Auliels and Uchis and things like that. Sure. So it's not super uncommon to have two different people with the same name. But I always thought it was kind of interesting to be like, you know, you're reading Lady Gregory and it's like, his daughter, Blóhin. Sorry? Maybe this was a kind of a... Maybe she was seen as his kind of foster child or something before he married her. Maybe there was this kind of thing of like she was under his guardianship after he abducted her. It's never really explained, or maybe it's just a mistranslation or a different version. There's no definitive version of that. It doesn't make him come off less creepy that she's called his daughter in a different story.
Yeah, it doesn't help the situation.
Doesn't help.
But he's kind of he's positioned as this kind of amazing druid magic warrior type character that has so many ingredients about him that just sound mythic and epic and amazing. And he's off searching for the Fíor
Fir.
And go to YouTube if you're not on this already. I'm going to stop the Instagram page.
Yeah.
That was annoying me. But does this mean he was going off searching for the truth of men? And this is like this idea of going off wandering, kind of going out and finding what masculinity is all about. What's the noble side of being a man? Now, clearly his actions don't dictate that he's a very noble man, but he's off.
He clearly thought they did.
Well, actually, his actions dictate that he's a very noble and fair man if you leave women out of the equation completely. Because he pops up throughout, he's in the town on fucking Ulster's side because a giant comes and he's like, no, this isn't fair, I'm going to kill the giant, and then he just fucks off again because he's like, no. He's like, you know, he's like an equalizer, he's a judge.
Yeah,
you know, like her sent the warriors down to Roi, they get to him and they know that they can't kill him, but he's not necessarily a prick about it. You know, no. He was fair until he was, in his head, fair until he was wronged by the Ulstermen. It's the weird thing is that there was no consideration on his part for women. He's looking for the warrior code, the main thing. He has no concept of a woman could be intelligent and have her own thoughts and plot against me and ultimately destroy me and kill me.
Which is a really kind of interesting idea for a tragic character. Like if you think of the Greek tragedies, there's all these like exemplary heroes who have one fatal flaw. And Roi's fatal flaw is that he forgets that women are people. And so he goes about behaving perfectly honorably and really, really, like, as a great person, searching for the way to be great and good in the world, and like a force for justice and an equalizer and a balancer. And he crops up in the town as well, where Cuchulainn is lying unconscious, and somebody says to him, do you want to kill Cuchulainn and be the man who killed Cuchulainn? And Roi says, no, he's unconscious, that would be dishonorable. And he's like, that's very, very rare
in
Irish mythology. Yeah. Exactly. That wouldn't be that would not be worthy of me to kill Cuchulainn like that.
Fíor Fir?
I know you're asking me this because I started ranting about it earlier this afternoon when we were talking about this. But
go on. I have no idea what you're talking about. Go on, tell us.
On Facebook now.
I just kind of thought, do you know what? It's really funny. Like it's just that thing again of there's nothing new under the sun. Like, we think it's a recent phenomenon in history for men to be going out into the woods together or going to sweat lodges and going on these like men's retreats and going like, what is it to be a real man? What is positive masculinity as opposed to toxic masculinity? You know, that term that men coined in the 70s to distinguish toxic masculinity from positive masculinity that feminists get blamed for now because we needed more reasons for men to be mad at us. Thanks, lads. Like that, this idea of there's some eternal truth of masculinity that we have to go out and look for, is clearly something that preoccupied Roi. That was what he was doing. He was going out around the world looking for something. And I just think it's a kind of an interesting, preoccupation for a man in the ancient world to have, and for this to be his kind of legacy. And I also think it's just an interesting, personally, I think if you're looking outside for an eternal truth about yourself, you're always going to end up frustrated.
Yeah.
Because it's the internal work there that is the important work. You're never going to find that stuff outside of yourself.
Well, you reminded me of. Sorry, you finished?
Yeah, I've kind of come to a conclusion there. But yeah, no, I mean, it just all of that kind of work of, what did they call it? It wasn't was it the Meninist movement? It kind of started, I think, back in the 70s with Robert Bly and people like that, looking at,
Because you
and Michael
reminded me
Mead.
earlier of Robert Bly's kind of retelling of Iron John, which is a Grimm's fairy tale, and that idea of Iron John needing to leave home, going off on the quest, basically having to sever the link between mother and child. And Robert Bly kind of looks at it as like a young boy having to kind of find his own independence, sever the link with his mother and go off into the wilderness in order to learn to be dependent and independent and not depend on others, to go and face challenges that will bring out his own inner strength, I suppose, which is a very interesting and he posits this excellently. I very much enjoyed that idea of it. I think oftentimes the lack of acknowledgement that there is the men's circles, there is room to just bang drums, go out into the wild, get your feet in the dirt, go swim in the sea, find a bit of outlet for the masculine form of energy, which is oftentimes can be called toxic if it's over aggressive or it's pushed into something that isn't used creatively. It can be thrown into abuse, it can be thrown into belittling others, using your power wrongly, not co-creating.
Yeah, I mean, I have the same problem with that as I have with any discussion of masculinity and femininity, which is the core confusion that people have, where they think that when you say masculinity, you exclusively and only mean men.
Right.
And when we say femininity, we exclusively and only mean women, which is actually not at all true.
Yeah.
If anybody has any understanding of those terms, it's that masculinity and femininity as energies exist in everybody.
Sure. And that's how I try and
that's what kind of makes, that's the kind of thing that tends to frustrate me about discussions of gender and gender essentialism and what is masculinity and what is femininity, because first of all, those things are so socially constructed, and then second of all, it's I think it's really important every time we talk about this to clarify that when you are saying masculinity, you cannot just be talking about men. And when you're saying femininity, you cannot just be talking about women, because that's like all of us cutting off our own arms and then saying, look how complete a person I am.
Yeah,
you can't fucking do it.
Sure.
It's left hand, right hand. It is both, or else it doesn't fucking exist.
I agree. At the same time, I know that women and girls and groups of women get together more often, have more. Currently now, I can just see my girlfriend and her sisters and all of the groups and WhatsApp groups they're in, and have so many forms of connection with other women and men don't necessarily do that naturally.
Which is not natural at all. That has nothing to do with naturally. That is entirely socially constructed, because men are not allowed to express affection to each other in the same way that women are. That's a societal construct, not a natural human thing.
Okay.
So yeah, there is a need for I think, dismantling the system that tells men that they're not allowed to hug each other, which is the same system that tells women a whole lot of nasty shit about themselves. But yeah, there's a need for work to be done there.
Sure, and that's where those stories like that are kind of, and again reframing this Roi story of looking at someone's devout attention to finding out the truth of man, and kind of going, also you ignored women and treated them horribly.
It's different to that though, because first of all, he didn't have to go and find the truth of men for all of the reasons he just listed, because he didn't need anybody else's help. He was a druid. He had, he was a lone wolf kind of character.
Yeah.
So why he was going to find the Fíor Fir is completely, what the fuck was he doing? Why, he had absolutely no reason to go on a walkabout.
Yeah.
I think his dad was pretty fucking epic.
Who was his dad?
Was that he was another date. Shit, I can't remember. Slipped out now.
Nearly had it.
But yeah, he like he didn't need and also he went out on his own.
Yeah.
He didn't meet up with a group of warriors. He went out on his own, joined up with like the Ulster men for the crack to see how they raid, and then saw they behaved dishonorably and was like, man, no, you're shitheads. You know, so like it's like he epitomized everything that was kind of good about masculine energy, but completely removed any feminine energy from the equation.
Right.
So there was no balance then.
No balance.
You know what I mean? So it's like he just ends up going. He just ends up on this one track.
And it's such a weird, because like you fall down into this like grey area in Irish myth again, where there's no good, there's no bad. He's presented as like a ruler, a kind of a form of justice, a form of noble authority, and also does all this horrible wicked shit, and yet has this kind of grey area morally. You're kind of like, where, and like he seems to be such an epic hero as well at the same time. Like,
yeah, but I think that's one of the real. I think that's one of the really strong points of Irish mythology, because we have such, and I think I lay it firmly at the feet of fucking of a certain religion that has been dominant in the world for the past 2,000 years. This idea that of good and evil, this idea of good and evil as fundamentally divisible forces. Yeah. We were just talking about masculinity and femininity, and how I'm like, we can't pretend these are fucking divisible. We cannot pretend that good and evil are divisible. And it gets us into such trouble, moral absolutism. It gets us into such trouble over and over and over again when we say people who do this are bad and that's all they are. And good people don't do that. And people who do that are bad. Or people who do this are, you know, we've got the good people and we've got the bad people, and never the twain shall meet. There's a use of twain there for Aaron and Ciara. Just threw it in there.
Nice.
Like, it gets us into such fucking trouble. Because then it's like you see it happening over and over again. Like poor people, you know, people who are in poverty, or people who are getting into criminality, or people who get into drugs. It's like the demonization of people in extreme circumstances. This idea of like, oh, your behavior is indicative of an essential nature that is either good or evil, and it is unchangeable, whatever it is, and therefore, if you fuck up once, I can kill you, incarcerate you, drive you out of society, and there's no hope for you ever, and there's no such thing as redemption. And I think it's really fucked, and I think it has really screwed us on a global, planetary level, that mindset.
Yeah, I mean, like...
that's my very soft opinion on this. Obviously, I'm in that kind of a mood tonight from like very tentative.
Can I summarize really quick?
No, you can't, because someone can't hear you, your epic accent, because you're not...
That's from ages ago.
Oh, is it? Yeah. Well, make sure you can...
Okay, I'm going to summarize really quick.
Okay, summarize very clearly.
The difference between right and wrong is only a matter of opinion. And in my opinion, I'm fucking right. Now, go debate that on both sides of the argument. You know, you've good, evil, right and wrong. It's like, and it is literally an opinion. I think I'm right because all of this shit that I've heard from fucking everybody around me tells me that I'm right. Now, unless I'm deliberately going against my nature and deliberately making poor decisions, in which case I would be deemed to be, I'm going to say alienated, because let's go back to the really old terms for mental health that actually fucking really meant something, because you're alienated from society, so you don't want to go with the flow, so you're deliberately going against it. Okay, if that's not the case, then you know everybody kind of naturally wants to be harmonious and work together, so that's right. But that's only if you're surrounded by people who all agree with you. Now, what happens then is you take a certain country on a certain continent where half of them don't agree with each other, and now we can just sit back and watch and see, right, what happens now when this system actually has to, when it hits tipping, because it's always a democracy. At a certain point, it's going to be 49-51, so 49% of people are fucking unhappy for whatever period of time until a few jump ship.
A few more are born.
Yeah, exactly. So you just end up with this like right, wrong. Whoa, stop.
Chris Rock summed it up brilliantly, kind of going, you can't be right all the time, even if you're left, and you can't be wrong all the time, even if you're, you know, right. Like, and like you have to be allowed to be a bit of both some of the time. You know, the grey area, like we say, that grey area is where people
Well,
actually
yeah,
exist in.
this idea, like, because that lack of grey area, that absolutist thinking, that one of the reasons it gets you into so much trouble is because you start then identifying with a group that shares your opinion, and you then start to externalize that onto your whole tribe, as we are all good, and therefore everybody who's not us is all bad, and it just gets more and more entrenched. No. And you get more and more into the Jungian projection thing, where everything that you don't want to acknowledge about your own shit gets projected onto other people. So, like, they're bad for all of the stuff that I'm ashamed of in myself but can't acknowledge. Okay. And it just becomes this incredibly destructive force in the world. I'm against it. I don't know if you noticed.
You mentioned a certain religion, and there was definitely a little bit of a trope thrown in there with, and hey, we've seen it in maybe a Slavic myth, we've definitely seen it in Harry Potter, this whole putting your soul in an object out there. Fair play to you, J.K. Rowling, nicking stories left, right and centre.
And listen, we're hardly the ones to give anybody any shit about not using original stories.
Very honest about it. We're fucking very honest about it.
She hasn't had a fucking original idea in her life. But that's alright, like, that's fine.
I was going to subtly
most of them were fuck that. Most of them were actually pretty good ideas in the Harry Potter books. It was when she started doing that shit on Twitter and retweeting all the worst fucking ideas of humanity that it got a little bit like, please go and lie down, lady, and leave your fucking keyboard after you.
Yeah. Gone. Now, I do want to just mention that idea of the soul being in an object. I mean, being placed somewhere else. Like, first of all, it's the first folktale myth that I've heard. Well, not folktale, but it's the first Irish myth that I've heard a soul being mentioned in, bar the.
Really? But sure, the soul is in the head, and that's why they make the brain balls.
Yeah.
Oh, that one. That was a story I told recently. Whoops. It's one of the.
It's not a.
Go ahead.
Yes. Finish your question.
But it's one of the first mentions that I've seen having a soul, because it's not something. Okay, there was a chopping off your life afterwards. Maybe I rephrased it in terms of like living afterwards. But there wasn't a heaven situation. Having a soul is a very Christian thing. You know,
it's not a Christian thing at all. Having a soul is one of the few things that is universal to almost every religion.
Yeah, it's an ego thing.
It's also like, it doesn't necessarily imply the existence of an afterlife. A soul, no, it does not. A soul is this idea, like, it can be as simple as an animating force. It is a spark of life. The idea of the soul being something that is, egoically yourself that then goes to heaven or to hell is the Christian version of that idea. But that's the idea of a soul is near universal in spiritual traditions. Whether that soul kind of dissolves back into the bigger universal soul, or whether it is reincarnated, or whether it goes somewhere else, or whether it evaporates, that's where they all wildly diverge. But I think it's an interesting question to think about afterlife, because the big preoccupation for these heroes, and we'll see it again in the rest of the Death series, is not living a long time. It's dying gloriously enough and explosively enough that the story will be told. Because that's the way that you live on, is through the stories that are told of you.
Yeah. And that's
which I really like.
But that's what's so tragic nearly at the very end of the Kuroi story, is that his bard jumps out the window with all the rest at the end of the story, so you don't get to hear any of it. And like, that's a double murder. Like, you know, he's killed twice.
Which is a really interesting thing as well, because the bard, like, he lets his desire for vengeance trump his duty to his master. Like, his duty to his master, and what Fíor Mná asks him to do, is tell them the story of Kuroi. Yeah. He's dead now. Your whole fucking job, my dude, is to tell us his story and keep him alive forever. And what does this guy do? He grabs your one and mows her off a cliff. So he's so his desire for vengeance. I mean, I think this is also a cautionary tale against, getting too close to your personal bard. Because if he's that sad when you die, that he commits suicide.
Make sure you have a backup bard.
Right?
Yeah.
Back up all your recordings.
Keep him in
Back
the
up your
Google
bard.
Tower. Make sure he's there, safe.
Yeah. Save your bard to Google Drive.
Yeah. Google Tower, the mythical
Google
tower.
Yeah.
The mythical
Yeah,
tower.
have a couple of words.
But the other thing is, the word soul is used. I used the word soul because it was in the source that I found or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's more than likely been translated from something that didn't quite mean so.
And that's the fucking
Like,
whole
we always,
philosophy
you know,
of translations. You know, we don't quite have a word that, and again, it's coming from Old Irish. So yeah, you're quite possibly right there, isn't?
And it's Old Irish that was transcribed from an older story that had been around for who knows how long.
Yeah. And the Lady Gregory ones are cool because they're kind of anti-Christian. They're very pagan because Lady Gregory and Yeats were kind of devout pagans. And actually distributed versions, like because the church distributed versions of the stories to the schools, edited, and then nobody ever proved that it was Gregory and Yeats, but somebody then, it's particularly the Oisin and Patrick one, but somebody then distributed a pamphlet with the actual ending of the story, which is pagan versus Christian debate around Dublin at the time when they were doing it, because it was quite fashionable to be translating.
The versions of those go back to like the 7th century though. Of the different versions of the Oisin and Patrick story. The one where he converts to Christianity and the one where he says, no, fuck off, I'm going to go find the Fianna in hell and bust them out.
Stay on
Like
topic, guys. Stay on topic.
Well, like, you know, those guys have been editing stuff since what? When did they start? 2020 years ago?
2020 years ago, just about.
But so looking at the story as it was told, because we don't know what the death of Curoi or how the death of Curoi, because that's what we're talking about, how that was socially or what construct it was under when it was being told in the oral tradition, because no one fucking knows. And then it was written down, and there was this weird ending put on it. It was a weird construct of basically, as we talked about already, don't trust women. And it was a very not, like we look at it now, and every time we've told it live, you've told it from the perspective of the woman, Blonid? No.
Yeah, Blonine.
Flower.
Blonid or Blohin.
Yeah, I always
depending on your version. Or Blonine.
And then that now just reads and just sounds terrible, and everyone just goes, wow, what the fuck? Because now
That's why I like it.
Yeah. But it's a sharp contrast between the then and the now of what are kind of social tastes and how we can actually put up with moral ambiguities and strange moral kind of endings to something that's like being forced upon us. We hear that now and we go, whoa, that's really wrong. Leaving it open and ending it like you did, which is a sad tale that the stories have been like ruined and not passed on because we've lost that because of the venge-filled bard, as it were. But the story that we tell now, without really realising it, is encoded with our own social biases. Because
I'm very aware of that.
All right. I mean, we're encoding it with our own social biases.
Everybody in the world is biased. Everybody is extremely biased based on their own culture and their own the cultural waters that they have grown up in. And part of what we do with the storytelling, and part of what some of us have consciously done from the beginning with the storytelling, is recontextualize those stories so that they are meaningful today. And so that they raise questions that are interesting to us today. And I think, I've been on that, definitely since the beginning, because I think there's so much in those stories that is worth keeping, and also there's so much in those stories that I like, that we like to reframe and recontextualize, and because you could absolutely tell the death of Curoi story with that ending about Blohin being untrustworthy, and you could just skate over the fact that she was abducted. You could make her sound out like a woman who had agreed to marry him and had come and had decided to assassinate him for no good reason. That's absolutely a telling that you could do if you wanted to tell it that way. I don't.
No, so yeah, well,
But
of
like
course, none of us.
that's
do.
one of the wonderful things about retelling old stories is that you get to choose what in them do you want to keep, and what in them do you want to highlight, and what is your perspective on them, and what do you want to transmit through them.
I mean, of course, it's very interesting to see the world that we live in, and whatever biases and society that we learn to operate within are constructed by the stories that we get told and we tell ourselves. And that's what I find fascinating about the more that we look into and research and talk about stories, the more amazing it is that the stories that we're telling are also constructed by the world that we're living in. And they're, currently myths are being created without really fully understanding how they're being made, as well as the current ways of linguistics and folk tales and beliefs that are like percolating and being told and spread around. And they're memes now. They were stories once upon a time. Now they're becoming different. You transmit it in different ways.
It's a riff.
Yeah.
Everything's a riff or a hook, bumper sticker. Half a haiku. Your misquoted sarcasm is the lowest form of wit. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
yet the highest form of intelligence. If you finish the quote, you know what I mean. It's like once you meme it, you lose half of it.
You do, and you lose half of the context of these. What was the one I found out recently was Jack of all trades is master of none.
Yeah.
The second half of that? Oftentimes better than the master of one.
Yes. Ooh. Wow. Lovely.
It entirely reverses it.
Yeah.
Made me feel a lot better.
Oh, wow.
But as society, like, if you think about it, like, everybody sitting around when they were telling these stories and, it's fucking freezing, it's cold, it's winter, they're bored. Like, especially Norse mythology. I love Norse mythology.
Yeah.
It just gets like really, really, really epic, really, really, really quickly, and then a giant wolf will come in and eat the sun or something, or eat the moon, and you're like, okay, I can see where this was going. But within the Irish mythology, they just sort of glance, like there's a bit of that, and then it stops.
Yeah.
It's like we'll big them up this much, but then
because there always seems to be this very capable human aspect, and it's very relatable. Whereas like sometimes the Greek myths and the Norse myths have like these gods that are just so powerful that you couldn't touch them.
But their society was probably a little bit more
worship based.
No, communicating, more integrated. At that stage, because transport had gotten easier and stuff like that, just general tools had improved over the 1,000 years or whatever amount of time. So what I'm thinking is that, like, what I'm seeing now is that as people are on social media essentially all the time, they're communicating with each other, and the more people that communicate with each other, the more people realize, oh, okay, right, we all have the same problems, or we think very similarly. It's one of those things, like, we all, like, no matter where you go in the world, the sound people make when they laugh is the same, and the sound that people make when they cry is the same.
Yeah.
Okay, babies all make the same sounds before they learn the language. Okay, so if you take away all of the bullshit of society that's going on, and I think we're seeing a lot of this now with social media, especially the younger generation of people that are on social media all the time. Somebody comes out and says something, and it's very, 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 there's no hush hush. You can't fucking like, oh, the priest would never do that. Oh, this member of society would never do that.
You can't fucking
do
that.
Fuck you, we're going to Ceausescu you through the fucking streets for 3 days, and you deserve it. Public shaming, good luck. It's, and that's, I'm going to get rid of Shantaram.
Yeah.
That's how they dealt with somebody acting the fuck in the slums, was they basically brought them out, publicly shamed them, and then ostracised them for a period of time.
Where my brother lives in Guatemala, he was watching the All Ireland final from Guatemala, but like they tie people to trees in the village if like they've beat them up and tied them to the tree, and that's the kind of way to like you do it in the village, not send them off to prison where they'll probably become a criminal and enrolled in some form of.
Well, they get absorbed into a gang in Guate, so like it's
exactly.
a much more destructive thing to do.
Yeah. So they know that if they can internally resolve it, it's a different form of doing it. It's not exactly to our modern first world standards.
Well, it's we've often talked about Brehon law and the idea that Ireland functioned for several hundreds, if not even thousands of years with neither prisons nor police.
Yeah.
It is a thing that can be done. And can be very peaceful and can be very functional because that was a law that was created by the people and was agreed on by the people and practiced daily by Brehons who were educated in it. But to go to your point about, and actually all of the Brehon law was encoded in stories and transmitted through storytelling because the Brehons were the storytellers that they were filled, which is takes us back to the importance of storytelling in the modern era. And I think you wanted to say something about that, Aaron.
So last week we put out in our email, our monthly email, which we did for the first time in 8 months.
Yes. Our biannual monthly email.
Nothing happened.
To be fair,
we had no live shows to tell you about.
We had no live shows. It was just like the podcast is where it's always been. Fucking leave us alone.
We've been working quite hard on putting together an online how we've taught My Streets, we've taught various workshops, we've taught groups, we're doing workshops in schools as well, and we finally decided to put this online, how we have taught each other and other people within Candlelit Tales the art or the arc of storytelling, and we're going to do a 6-week course starting in January on the 9th. It's going to be online, it's going to be on Sundays, it's going to be at 3 p.m. Irish time, and we're going to do it over a series of interactive game-based learning, iterative learning, so you're constantly going over similar stuff and getting better and better at storytelling, the oral tradition, building
it is
upon what we've done
a process
before.
that builds upon itself.
Exactly. And we'll be looking at Irish myths and how we integrate them into the way of storytelling, and this is going to be good for people who are interested in just speaking, telling stories at dinner tables, giving presentations, having to give work conferences, anything online. It will just help build confidence and help. I've taught this course once overline with a different group, and it's just amazing to see the confidence in people straight away. So we'll be releasing the content on our social media tomorrow, and if you want to inquire about it, let us know, DM us, and the price for the course is €300, or if you book before the solstice, the 21st of December, if you're listening to this now, you get 50 quid off. There you go, that's my sales pitch. Boom.
There you go.
Yeah.
Book before the 21st of December 2020.
Which we don't want to think about anymore. Great for teachers.
Which is
loads of teachers already very interested in it. So yeah, that brings us to the very end of this. We've started the death series. This is the death of Roi, post-show chat, done and dusted. The death of the, what's his name? Kelt
Karma got the car.
That's
Trigger
not even
warning,
the
lots
best
of
name in
dogs.
that one.
There's so many good names in that one.
Yeah.
What's the best name?
Conganknus McDaire Mac Daire is the best one.
Roi's brother.
Who
Conganknus.
is the brother of Roi Mac Daire? Exactly.
Yeah.
Conganknus McDaire Mac Daire.
And we're very excited to be telling the stories, the death stories of these heroes, these characters, because this is how we keep them alive. And we have a very interesting promo for Candlelit Tales, shot by Simon O'Neill. Check it out on our socials, coming very soon. And keep a candle lit. Yee-hoo! Thanks for tuning in, those of you who did. We'll catch you next time on the Candlelit Tales podcast.
Bye,
Tune in next time, guys. Bye.
Bye.